So geoengineering is refers to the large-scale, deliberate interventions in Earth's natural systems to counteract climate change, and there are two main types.
If our government is pumping shit into the air, I want to know. We've always wanted to control the weather. Kings and emperors and tribal leaders have always sacrificed people below them to control the weather. What makes our politicians today any different?
Which led to a catastrophic flash flood that killed over 30 people at the time, and that was considered a big conspiracy theory. But later down the line, declassified documents showed that, of course, it was true. The RAF were conducting research and experimentation.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest is a gentleman called Lewis Brackpool, not Blackpool, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Lewis, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. It's great to connect.
The first question is, how many times a day do you get called Lewis Blackpool?
Yes, pretty much at least once a day, somewhere or the other, whether it be the internet or in real life. I've had worse, but yeah, that's a common one.
Yeah, well, I get called worse all the time, and it's normally not by mistake. Thanks for coming on the show. I was speaking on one of my podcasts about how I needed to speak to someone about this particular issue we're going to be talking about because I know nothing about it. So let's jump straight into it. So it's about chemtrails. It's about geoengineering. It's about the white lines you see in the sky when aircraft are flown over. And for many years now, when people have mentioned chemtrails, I've always thought to myself, this isn't real. This is the same as who shot JFK. This is a conspiracy theory. Have people not got anything better to be worried about than making stuff up? And I thought about that for many years, but over the last 2 or 3 years, I began to understand that lots of things I thought were true turned out not to be true. So I wanted to relook at this issue because I could just be doing the same thing I've been doing all my life. These things aren't happening. What's behind it? And we're all guilty of thinking that other people are stupid and that I'm more intelligent than them, and I wouldn't fall for that. And I'm trying to get out of that habit. Hence why I put a call out, who should I be talking to? And someone said, you need to be talking to Lewis Brackpool, independent journalist, YouTuber. He knows about these things. So I invited you on the show. You graciously said yes. So let's get into this. What's going on? Am I an idiot for thinking these things? Is anything going on? Is it serious? Is it a conspiracy? I don't know where to start with. There's not many topics where I go, I don't know where to start because I know nothing. This is one of them.
Okay. Yeah. So firstly, thank you very much for having me on. Like I mentioned, there's lots to get into with this. And just as a context as well, I thought exactly the same. I think COVID was the big wake-up call for many, many people, including myself. And I have retraced steps and look back at things that I thought maybe I didn't believe, maybe I didn't, maybe I did, who knows. But let's first get into what it is. So what is, for everyone listening, what is chemtrails, quote unquote? Well, this definition actually aroused itself around sort of the mid 1990s, between 1996 and 1999, and it gained traction on popular internet forum sites when the internet was just barely getting to grips with what it was doing at the time. It was on big internet forums that focused mainly on things like UFOs, government secrecy, and environmental concerns and things like that. So that's where the name chemtrails came from. And it was kind of like a slang term, if you will. Now what we're hearing is the term geoengineering. So geoengineering refers to the large-scale, deliberate interventions in Earth's natural systems to counteract climate change. And there are two main types, One is called solar radiation management, which is the attempt to reflect a small portion of sunlight back into space to cool the Earth. And to do this are a few examples. One is called stratospheric aerosol injection, which is releasing reflective particles like sulfates into the upper atmosphere, very similar to recreating like a volcanic ash cloud, because after that, with the sulfur, it creates like a layer over the atmosphere that cools the planet. There's another thing called marine cloud brightening, which is spraying sea salt into clouds that makes them more reflective, and that can be done at ground level. And there are other wacky things like space-based reflectors, so big sort of mirrors or shields that you can put in orbit like a satellite. There's also another type called carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, which aims to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere and store it. You might hear a few things, especially within the net zero arena, things like direct air capture machines, enhanced weathering, so spreading minerals that absorb CO2, and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. This is very mainstream stuff. Scientists have been talking about this. The BBC even ran a headline recently about it. Even The Guardian posted something about stratospheric aerosol injection. So,
can I jump in there? Let me just jump. So, are these ideas being talked about, or are these ideas actually being implemented at the moment?
So both. It depends on where you look. We've always had a massive fascination with things like weather modification and climate intervention. I mean, we're Brits. We love to complain about the weather and all of that. So it's the perfect subject for us to, of course, talk about. The earliest or most infamous example of this is RAF Rainmakers. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's back in 1952. The RAF conducted experiments over Lynmouth in Devon, where they sprayed silver iodide over a series of tests, which led to a catastrophic flash flood that killed nearly over 30 people at the time. And that was considered a big conspiracy theory. But later down the line, declassified documents showed that, of course, it was true. The RAF were conducting research and experimentation over this with a thing called cloud seeding, which I'm sure you might have heard of. And so in Britain, we've been very interested in doing these things for decades and decades, since the early 40s or maybe even 50s. But it was very much a Ministry of Defense thing. It was very much military, kept under wraps, which has fueled the idea of it being a conspiracy. Now, it's still controversial. It's a massive controversial subject, obviously, because you'd have the mainstream media. If you use the term chemtrails, it gets stonewalled. People don't want to talk to you about it because you believe that it could be something to do with population reduction, quote unquote, or mind control. There was a famous, well, Prince, the artist Prince, who used to make lots of different types of music. He went on a chat show, a famous one in America, and made the claim that the trails in the sky were being purposely dropped on black neighborhoods to make them more angry or violent. Which obviously I don't believe that personally. That's my personal opinion, but it fueled a lot of hysteria. A lot of people were well, rightly confused and upset by all of this. But as time has gone on, you've started to see things like Dubai setting up a massive cloud seeding program that are looking to manipulate the weather in really dry places geographically. And America as well has a huge cloud seeding program or geoengineering program that you can easily track. Lots of journalists have tracked down areas where pilots have sprayed certain types of chemicals, whether it be sulfur, silver iodide, or other chemicals, barium, I believe, and aluminium. over some areas, and it has been proven. To add to that, I ran a Freedom of Information request not too long ago. This was sort of earlier in the year or last year, late last year, asked the Met Office, Britain's weather forecast, if they are conducting geoengineering experiments in the UK and whether there's any funding. And it came back with a whole list of funding, which universities were funding, small kind of projects and computer-based projects, where they were simulating how it would look if you would drop particles into certain areas. Now, to get the models, you need the real thing. So, of course, you can't go out and admit, well, we've been experimenting in this area. You have to do it via computer models because of ethics and, ethical safety. But the interesting thing was the funding. The Met Office received $200,000 from an NGO called Silver Lining, which has ties to the United Nations, to Congress, and they even presented programs and lots of different diagrams to show ways in which we could cool the planet or global warming, in order to use all of these practices that I've listed in geoengineering. So the reason why I differentiate the term chemtrails and geoengineering is they're both the same. It's the same thing, but one carries a stigma and one carries a sort of baggage behind it that you would see on, when you turn on like the TV back in the day on the late at night, and there was some dodgy history programs about UFOs and stuff like that. It would make its way onto that. And so it was easy to be discredited. But now it seems as though these practices have come a bit more mainstream over the years.
Right. So the first point is the government have admitted, different governments across the world have admitted that they're actually messing with the weather.
Correct.
So that's not debatable.
That's not debatable at all.
So we're messing with the weather. Have you ever seen a film called Highlander?
No, I haven't. No.
It's I forgot who's in it now. Sean Connery, and it's about people who can't die, sort of eternal, and it's a competition about chopping each other's heads off so you can be the only one left. Highlander 2 is based, from what I hope I'm not getting this film mixed up with another film, but Highlander 2, called Highlander 2 The Quickening, is based at a time where the Earth's weather has gone haywire, and that's because humans were messing with the weather, trying to control it, and they break the system, and now the Earth is almost inhabitable because they've been messing with weather. That's what just jumped in my mind, and this was probably in the 90s or the 80s. So they're messing with the weather. My next point is normal. So when summer's there, you look in the sky where you live in England, and you see the trails in the sky where airplanes have just gone past. I've always believed they were water vapor coming out of the engines of the planes. When we say geoengineering, are we putting stuff secretly into commercial jets and commercial planes that no one knows about? Or is that just water vapor, and the things we're doing to the environment, they're specific planes flying up just to do that?
So I've received many messages about this. Can you look into commercial airlines as opposed to operations conducted via government and isolated experimentation as opposed to consistent trails from commercials? Now I'm still trying to investigate this because the theory is in the 90s. Jet fuel made a big transition. I think the Americans transitioned over, I think it's to do with kerosene. It's a type of fuel. And I think they wanted to make it more biodiverse and a bit more greener. So I think people started to notice that what we believe is condensation or water vapor is a lot thicker and it trails for longer because of this changeover. Now, Shell, you can go on their website, admits that they do fuel additives for jet fuel. Now, I think the key argument here is what is the additives within jet fuel? And I am still trying to investigate whether what's in it for a start. The Americans have a more solid understanding to do with additives over there, but over here, I'm still trying to figure it out. There are patents that you can find or Google. If you type into Google jet fuel weather modification pattern and you put in aluminium or barium or anything like that, you can find hundreds of patents from Google that will tell you a bit more information, and it's quite damning. So for me, I'm still trying to investigate it. I'm still trying to understand it. I don't want to necessarily jump to conclusions, but I certainly don't want to sneer at others who have legitimate concerns when they look up and they're quite they start to notice, hang on a minute, I didn't see that in the 90s, or I didn't see that in the 80s, or even sort of the late 90s. It was a lot different. So I don't obviously sneer or look down upon them, whilst the mainstream media and other commentators might do. But I'm still trying to investigate it. I've sent a Freedom of Information request to the CAA, asking whether they have overseen risk assessments to do with metal particles within jet fuel, and their answer was quite astonishing. It's taken me 40 working days to get a proper response. And now I've had to escalate it with the ICO because they're not providing me with any risk assessments. They just say, well, we don't handle that. But then I thought, well, hang on a minute, you're the CAA. You're supposed to overlook safety regulations for aircraft. I know that you don't have a laboratory to test fuel. I get that. But you're the safety regulator. Why do you not have a risk assessment in place for things such as jet fuel and the health hazards it might cause humans if it's done over a prolonged period of time? And if there are additives within fuel, like many of the quote unquote conspiracy theorists have said since the 90s. So I'm still trying to investigate that and to try and figure out what is going on. But when it comes to geoengineering, cloud seeding, weather manipulation, and solar radiation management, all of these terms, you can find hundreds and hundreds of stories from across the world of different governments engaging in weather modification in isolated cases, not necessarily through commercial aircraft.
So the fact that you can't rule out the fact that they're messing with commercial jet fuel, even if it turns out that they're not, the fact you can't rule that out will in itself trigger conspiracy theories. It will trigger people going, this sounds like you're hiding something from me, or you're just purely incompetent. And either answer isn't a good answer.
Absolutely. And to add, we're all trying to go through the green agenda now. It's all about being net zero. It's all about being environmentally friendly. Global warming was the big topic with Al Gore in the early 2000s. And, Britain is trying to become net zero by 2030, 2035, now 2050. They keep pushing the date back. There's been a lot of talk about aircraft fuel and going more biodiverse. There was a meeting between Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of India, Modi, and Bill Gates in Glasgow. This was back in 2021, I believe, for COP26, I think was the one where they spoke specifically about airline fuel or jet fuel and trying to make it more biodiverse and more greener. So you can't really rule out that there has been, well, it's clear there has been a transition with jet fuel for commercial airlines and military aircraft. And many pilots have, come forward and spoken to me personally and said, I've been commercial for X amount of years, or I've worked in the military as pilots throughout the years, yes, there has been changes, and there's a lot of stuff that I still need to try and figure out. So I'm not going to jump to any conclusions because I don't think that's fair yet. Um, but there is something you cannot rule it out, and that's what's made me sit back and realize actually there could be something. It might not be anything, but I'd rather look and try and figure it out. But ever since I've started doing this, I've started to notice your sort of friendship circles start to shrink as it did during COVID and various other topics. But yeah, like I said, I personally wouldn't use the term chemtrails because it might, stonewall. Um, but I'm never ever going to sneer at someone or look down or anything like that on someone that does choose to use that term. And I think a lot of people have become so ideologically divided now with topics that they don't even want to look into it in case they're afraid that their reputation or the way they're perceived might look a little bit mad or different. But I've kind of just gone, well, it's not about me, it's about figuring out what is true or not. So yeah.
Let me put this scenario to you. You're the Prime Minister of England. Let's say you're Boris Johnson, and you believe in this net zero rubbish. Um, Jet fuel is a problem because that is contributing to the warming of the planet, allegedly, but you actually believe that. So you take that as fact. But you don't want to ban aircraft because that's going to affect your economy. So therefore, a company says to you, we can improve your jet fuel by adding these things into it. But the downside is it may, over the long term, give people cancer. We could do more research on this, but it's going to take 10, 20 years for us to do the research, or we can do it now because the planet's going to burn to death if we don't do it now. Can you foresee a prime minister or a president going, do it now when we save the planet?
Yes, and I fear that that scenario may have already happened, and that's what I fear. This is why I think it's crucial to be vigilant and to not rule anything out. And that's not theorizing, that's based on, what has been said, the transition to net zero and the environmental agenda, the investment, the heavy investment in the green lobby or the green money, as we call it, green dark money or whatever. Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out personally. And you get called all sorts of things if you theorize such a thing, but we've seen the pattern over time since, well, since a long time. Man has been wanting to modify the weather for a long time, even before the 1940s. So you can't rule that stuff out. What woke me up to this and made me realize actually there could be something was a particular story. And after this, I'll send you all the links for everything I've spoken about for you to take a look.
And I'll put all those links in the description of this video so other people can check them out.
Perfect. Scientific American, so a very mainstream scientific journal that published the story. Um, Last year posted a story saying geoengineering test quietly launches salt crystals into the atmosphere. A solar geoengineering experiment in San Francisco could lead to brighter clouds that reflect sunlight. The risks are numerous. And I sat there and I thought, and I read through it, and it said the use was stratospheric aerosol injection. And I thought, I was always told that this was a conspiracy theory. And the fact that they quietly did that didn't help, because I thought, well, okay, that is conspiracy. If you're doing tests without the public's consent, or you're doing it quietly to prevent anyone from disrupting it or from protesting against it, that's a real risk. There's been no global. You cannot globally consent to such a thing. If there was a massive geoengineering injection of chemicals into the atmosphere over populations, it's impossible to get some sort of global consent of that. So that's where um, that's where the media are very tactful when it comes to using certain phrases, making it sound very scientific. They'll say, "Well, chemtrails aren't real," and you go, "Okay, fine." Oh, but geoengineering is. You go, "Well, it's the same thing." Well, no, it's not. One believes in mind control, and I'm sitting there going, "No, no, no." But climate control, that's another part of it. And they say, "Oh, yeah, well, that exists," and you go, "Yeah, you're not helping yourselves," you know. Um, so going back to the hypothetical quote unquote scenario, yeah, I wouldn't rule that out at all.
Yeah, and for people who say that would never happen, let me give this example. Humans have always wanted to be gods. If you can control the weather, you're godlike. And we've done this throughout our history. How many virgin girls did we sacrifice on the altar so the crops wouldn't fail? And when we say the crops wouldn't fail, what we mean is so it rains. That's what we mean when we say crops don't fail. We've always wanted to control the weather. Kings and emperors and tribal leaders have always sacrificed people below them to control the weather. What makes our politicians today any different?
Hmm. It's a great point. It's a very, very great point. And I think that's why it's so important to keep having the conversations. Don't worry about, being called whatever names or whatever if your, friendship group shrinks. Um, it is important to keep asking questions and to try and get answers, and if you keep getting stonewalled by, because you're using the wrong terminology, you can easily change the terminology in order for them to say, "Oh no, yeah, that's real," even though it's exactly the same as what you were, talking about. Um, so yeah, like you said, man has had a fascination with weather manipulation for decades and decades throughout history. So and us Brits love complaining about the weather, like we've mentioned. So it would not surprise me if such a thing has already been said or done.
Yeah, exactly. And here's some other examples for you. When we had the created the petrol engine, and then I forgot the guy's name now. He added lead to petrol to make it easier on the engines, smoother on the engines, and then lead in the petrol fumes killed loads of people. Just because we do something for the right reasons, it doesn't mean we understand the consequences to our actions. Same with the drug thalidomide in the 70s.
Thalidomide, yeah.
We created a drug to help pregnant women, no, to help morning sickness in pregnant women.
Morning sickness, yeah, that was it.
Then it deformed the babies born of women who took thalidomide. And we never understand the consequences further down the line. And we never understand what people will do. My best example would be the Chinese guy who invented the crossbow. And the crossbow was unique because to be an archer could take decades of training to be a good archer. You could learn to fire a crossbow in 3 minutes. And then you were a decent soldier. And the guy who invented the crossbow said something along the lines of, with a weapon as powerful as this, surely this will end all wars. Just because we think something is for the national good and the global good doesn't mean it will happen because we're stupid, we're conceited, we're flawed, and we hardly know anything in the grand scheme of things. We're very capable of making huge mistakes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it any better. And yeah, keep asking questions is what I would say. Even The Guardian came out with a spread very, very recently. I'll just bring that up now. But The Guardian is even warning about stratospheric aerosol injection. And if The Guardian are turning around and saying, "Hang on a minute, like, we shouldn't actually be doing this," and yet I'm being called a conspiracy theorist from both the left and the right, but then when a mainstream source comes out and said, "Actually, I don't think this is right," we're in a bit of a conundrum, really, because who are you going to start to then believe? It creates a messy environment for discourse. Um, Let me just bring up the here it is. Yes, so this came out recently. It's an opinion from The Guardian. It says the UK's gamble on solar geoengineering is like using aspirin for cancer. Injecting pollutants into the atmosphere to reflect the sun would be extremely dangerous, but the UK is funding field trials. Now, when I when I did my FOI request, and I showed some funding, and I showed all the universities that were funding these experiments, and pumping millions and millions of pounds into this research. Um, the BBC, after I started posting about it, and a lot of people started, the topic of geoengineering started to, rise in the UK a little bit more. Not to say that I was the one to do that, obviously. It was obviously other people too. But more and more people started to talk about it. The BBC then went and decided to write a headline saying conspiracy theories whirl surrounding geoengineering experiments, but could it help save the planet and cool the planet? And it was kind of like you're a conspiracy theorist, but it could actually help. So we're actually gonna, yeah, admit it. It's just a bizarre concoction. It's like it does remind me in some ways of the COVID era, and everything surrounding the vaccination or the vaccine. People were like raising the alarm bell over mRNA and all of these sort of stuff. And we're just being stonewalled once again throughout another topic. So keep keep asking questions is my point, I guess.
Yeah, and the reason why the BBC and the Guardian don't want you discussing this, don't want any of us discussing this, because the same type of people who discuss this also have views they don't like. So therefore they need to shut down those people completely. So it's easier then just to say all those people are nutcases. They don't deal with the argument, they attack the person. And as a journalist, Lewis, thank you for coming on this show. But what I'd like to leave with is you carry on doing what you're doing, because that's what a journalist should do. A journalist should dig and dig and dig. And at the end of the hole you're digging, you may find nothing. But do you know what? We don't know that until you get to the bottom of that hole. Many times you dig, you dig, you dig, and you find the things other people don't want you to find. And there's no magic wand to know which holes we should be digging in. We need to be digging in them all to find out what's at the bottom of them. So for me, thank you very much for digging.
Oh, no, thank you, Nick. That means a lot. And thank you for having me on. I actually put out a tweet the other day saying I think more conservatives or more people on the right of politics should actually start speaking about geoengineering, because it's becoming it's starting to become a bit more of a mainstream topic to talk about, and it's a very important one, and it affects all sorts of things from the net zero agenda to farmers, to health and public health. So from me to you, Nick, thank you very much for having me on and allowing me to explain and clear anything up and to give some new knowledge to people as well.
No, you're welcome. If our government is pumping shit into the air, I want to know.
Mm, absolutely.
I want to know.
So do I.
Lewis, thank you very much for coming along, and let's catch up again.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye bye.